And then Mick and Keith come over, sit next to me. And I'm not telling stories out of school. I think this is in Keith's book. They both sat on either side of me, and they both started talking and would not yield the conversation to the other guy. So 2 minutes sounds like not a lot of time, but it's an eternity when you got these two iconic faces talking at you like this, and I was going back and forth, and finally they both stop at the same time, and Keith said, "You sure you won't be the meat in this sandwich?"
Your Uncle Joe's Garage, presented by MAV TV Motorsports Network.
You know, I'm talking with Don Was here, the famous producer. The last time we had a conversation that went very far was Tower Records and Sunset Boulevard.
Yes.
And I haven't a damn clue what it was we were talking about. It must have been really interesting.
Yeah, well, there are a couple of decades that are kind of blurry.
Decades, there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your Uncle Joe's Garage. I've got the famous Don Was in here, one of the most successful, certainly one of the most successful bass players, but when it comes to production as well. Check this out. Besides the incredible Was Not Was, Welcome to the Boomtown, which we played the bejesus about here, you've worked with, he already is aware of this, so I'm doing this for you guys. Bonnie Raitt, B-52s, Michael McDonald, Iggy Pop, Bob Dylan, Elton John, Leon Russell, Bob Seger, Ringo, Glenn Frey, Roy Orbison, Willie Nelson, David Crosby, Jackson Brown, Van Morrison, John Mayer, and Ben Tench, who we love to death. Absolutely. And this scruffy band called the Rolling Stones. You've worked with them as well.
That's a blur. I don't remember that one.
That's in quite a ways not surprising. Your most recent project is the one for Gregg Allman, his final album, Southern Blood. Yeah. How did you get into working? You knew Gregg for quite a while, didn't you?
I knew him. Yeah, we were friends, and you know, the truth is, about 15 years ago, I was driving home from Santa Barbara, and I was listening to the radio, and the version of Midnight Rider from Laid Back came on. Yeah. I was like, oh man, this guy's the greatest. So I think it's unsavory for producers to like hustle artists, but I've done it only twice in my life where I went out and said, I really want to make a record. So I called his manager, and I tried to make a record happen, and it didn't happen at that time, but he always knew that I wanted to make a record with him. Mm-hmm. So about 3-4 years ago, we did a show in Atlanta. There was a tribute to Gregg. It was called All My Friends. It was a TV show, and it's on DVD and stuff. Really great experience. And he was doing some publicity to promote the show a week before. And it was just for like local papers to sell some tickets in Atlanta. And so I was reading it online. And one of the questions they asked him was, so what are you doing after the show? He said, well, I'm going to go to Muscle Shoals and make a record with my band called Southern Blood, and Don Was is going to produce it. And we had no conversations about it. So I saw him at the show, you know, like 4 or 5 days later. And I said, about this. He said, oh yeah, I hope that's cool with you, man. Said, yeah, of course it's cool. Let's go.
My God.
So we did it, yeah.
Did you have any idea at that point that it might be a farewell album?
I did. I wasn't supposed to, but I overheard a conversation during All My Friends, and I knew that he wasn't well and that he probably wasn't going to have a turnaround in his health, which gave the whole show a real bittersweet overtone to it. I wasn't sure whether to bring it up because I knew I wasn't supposed to know about it. So when I started suggesting songs to him, I thought, all right, we're going to Muscle Shoals. He wants to make a soul record. So I started sending him great soul covers, and he kept turning them down, and he didn't seem to want to do anything that was mundane, you know, just for the sake of it being a soul song, even though I knew he could really sing the hell out of these songs. Yeah. So I thought, okay, maybe he wants to go a little deeper. So I sent him Going, Going, Gone by Bob Dylan.
Dylan song. And
that's one that I mean, Bob wrote it, I suppose, about the end of an affair, or a relationship. But if you look at it as being about reaching the end of your life, it takes on a great deal of gravitas. So I sent that to him just to see how he'd react. And yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
So then I knew he wanted to get serious. So then we started choosing things that I thought pertained to what was happening. And it became clear over a period of time. We spent about 1.5 years looking for songs, right?
Pre-production.
And just emailing titles back and forth and sending each other CDs and all that, you know. And it became clear that he was making a farewell statement, and that everything on the album was going to be there for an important reason, not just because it was a groovy song. And it didn't all pertain necessarily to themes of mortality, but what it did pertain to was a quest, I think, for his own, a necessity for himself, and I think as a gift to fans, really, an attempt to tie up all the loose ends in his life and try to make sense out of his life and explain himself and the meaning of it all to himself and to the fans who stuck with him for 40 years.
Well, I tell you, the first song on the album,
My One True Friend.
Yeah, One True Friend. When I first heard that, I thought, oh my God.
That's pretty deep.
Sounds real close to.
Well, that's the one he wrote.
Perception.
You know? Yeah, he wrote that song, and you know, ostensibly it's about he's singing it to a woman and saying, you know, I'm sorry I can't be around more, but I'm a traveling musician, and the road is my one true friend. But it's a larger statement than that. Gregg is one of those guys, and there are a number of them, including that scruffy band you alluded to before, who come to life when they're on stage performing for their fans. That's really who they are. That's not an act you're seeing. This probably accounts for their enduring success, is that it's for real, and that's where they're the most comfortable. And all the trials and tribulations that these guys face in life comes about when they don't know what to do with themselves in between performances. Because the performance is when they're solid.
Especially with Gregg.
Especially with Gregg. So I think if you view his life through that lens, everything you know about him starts to make sense.
I love the line in the song, "Hope you're haunted by the music of my soul." Was that one that he wrote, or was that Scott, the guitar player? Just a combination?
You know something, I actually don't know who came up with it, but I know he was wrestling with that. At one point, I remember him saying, I don't know, does that sound too much like a ghost? and I was like, yeah, yes it does, you know. But he kept it. I think there's a theme running through a couple of these songs that I think has to do with just wondering whether he'll be remembered. Mm. You know, the Tim Buckley song, "Once I Was," kind of touches on that same thing. Again, it's ostensibly, when Tim wrote it, he's singing to a former lover, saying someone else is going to come along, and will you still remember me? But that can pertain to the audience as well, and I really think that's why Gregg wanted to include that song. So I think that's a very natural and extremely vulnerable state and a courageous thing to come forward and be that open with your listeners.
There was another song on this. We're talking about Gregg Allman's Southern Blood album, his final one, "Song for Adam." Mm-hmm. Which Jackson Browne had written many years ago. Yeah. In fact, Jackson and Gregg, of course, were roommates in the 60s out here. Yeah. Heaven forbid. And I'm glad none of us remember, probably. Good thing there weren't cell phones to take pictures of those days.
Thankfully, yeah.
But the line in that caught attention, he stopped his singing in the middle of his song. It was one of the lyrics that Jackson had written about his friend Adam. Mm-hmm. But for Gregg, you said that Dwayne was the focus.
It's about a guy whose life ends too soon, basically, and it always reminded Gregg of Dwayne, his brother, and I think that's who he had in mind when he was singing the song, and it was very emotional. We left it for last. It's the last song we cut, and when he got to the last 4 lines of the last verse. But it seems like he stopped singing in the middle of his song, and you can hear him with the record. He gets all choked up, and he couldn't get the next 2 lines out. Wow. And at the time, I just thought, well, all right, great. Well, when we do some overdubs, we'll pick up the last two lines. But it kind of became clear, well, first of all, we never had the opportunity to do any overdubs because his health deteriorated quite rapidly after we made that record, yeah. And so we never got, he was going to sing harmonies with himself and everything, and we were never able to do it. So everything that you hear on this record is basically the live vocals that he cut with the band in the studio that day.
Which to me is usually the most powerful ones.
Absolutely, yeah.
But for this, and then how much it touched on that.
Well, we ended up just leaving those last two lines open because it became clear that he too stopped singing. He figuratively and literally stopped singing in the middle of his song. And it just seemed like, all right, that's a very poignant exit for him to make.
Yeah. You know, we had someone in here, Don was, I've been waiting for this for a long time. We just had a little squirrely guitarist by the name of Waddy was in here.
My dear friend.
Yes, and I brought up, I wanted to know about him correcting Mick Jagger on having a wrong note.
Did
do you recall that? And then he said, there's a note that's wrong. And he said, well, you found it. It's Mick's. And you told him, well, why didn't you tell him about it since you found it?
I don't remember that. But
Well, it fit right into what he does.
I kind of set him up, maybe, huh? No, Mick would appreciate something like that. Mick, he approaches vocals, a very interesting cat, man. He approaches it the way an actor would approach maybe filming a part, right? So we tried different things. For the song, I know the song Waddy played on, there was a single called Anybody Seen My Baby?
Yes.
And on that song, I remember Mick was doing his vocal, and I said, well, is he sad here, or is he angry here? Because it gets a little more emphatic as it goes on, but it starts kind of quiet. And Mick said, well, that's a good question. Hang on a second. And he went in his bag and he pulled out a notebook. And Mick had written out the backstory and the continuation of the story after the song. So he had like the 5 days before the song happened and what happened after the song ends. So he said, well, yeah, no, I guess in this story, he's actually sad. So he stayed down in the lower octave. But I mean, that's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really cool. I've said actually one time I worked on a film with Francis Coppola. The Rainmaker was the name of it, which he directed, and so I was helping him do the music. He wanted to get some indigenous blues stuff. We shot it in Memphis, and I remember there was a scene with Matt Damon and Danny DeVito, and he let me sit on the set for like 2 weeks and take a master class in directing. It was a great thrill, and he had them do that. He had them act out, just improvise the 5 minutes before their scene that was scripted actually started, so that when they were, when they started the dialogue, they were in character. They didn't have to stop and get into character. They didn't have to go from 0 to 80 in 2 seconds. And I thought that was a very cool technique, and Mick did the same thing.
So we got quite a kick out of Waddy describing how Keith hired him for his band without an audition. Is that the way you got hooked up with the Stones, or did you run into Mick at the Whole Foods?
No,
nothing like that.
I ran into Ziggy at Whole Foods and ended up producing a record. So it's funny you should say that. It's not out of the question if you live in Los Angeles. Ziggy Marley, I ended up doing. No, they just signed a new record deal, and they hadn't really had a producer. They had engineers who co-produced with them, but they hadn't had a producer in a while. So I went to meet them. It was when they were auditioning bass players right after Bill Wyman left, and I went to SIR in New York City, and there was just them on stage with some guy playing bass who ended up not being Daryl Jones, but it sounded good, and they just ran through a greatest hits set. So I was already, my jaw had already dropped. And then Mick and Keith come over, sit next to me. And I'm not telling stories out of school. I think this is in Keith's book. They both sat on either side of me, and they both started talking and would not yield the conversation to the other guy. So 2 minutes sounds like not a lot of time, but it's an eternity when you got these two iconic faces talking at you like this, and I was going back and forth, and finally they both stopped at the same time, and Keith said, "You sure you won't be the meat in this sandwich?" That was my introduction to the Rolling Stones.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I walked out of there thinking, well, I mean, basically what Keith was telling me why they don't need a producer. And Mick was saying, well, no, maybe it'd be helpful for and I just thought I'd never get the gig, but they called me a couple weeks
25 years later.
25 years later, here we are. Yeah,
And you're going to work with them right after the Exodus thing. And then
It's been, one of the really, greatest parts of my life has been to be around those guys. They're really good guys, man. They've been really nice to me and very generous with me. And also, it's just, I've learned so much watching them. They're extraordinary. If you ever question whether like the world's greatest rock and roll band thing actually fits, it really is true. The interplay that goes on underneath what they do, the brilliance of their choice of notes and the spaces that they leave, and the way they weave this web of music that's just loose enough but really holds together. They're just the best in every way, man.
cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's really good to see you, man.
Next time you're back in town for more than 14 minutes.
We'll do it again.
Well, hey, here we are inside your Uncle Joe's garage, and I know you haven't been inside the garage yet, but I got some great news for you. We've created a mobile version of the Uncle Joe's garage thanks to our friends at Mike Thompson RV Superstores. Like they say, don't miss a moment. And don't miss the mobile Uncle Joe's garage when it comes to a location near you. I'll be looking for you.